Hi, welcome back to Burning Ripper Bushcraft. Today we're going to be making a pyramid style board bow. So the kids are off school right now due to the coronavirus outbreak, and one of the projects that we've been doing since he's home a lot more is we've been making some board bows. As I've mentioned in other videos, the kids don't have shop in school anymore, so this is a great way for kids to learn how to use normal hand tools and stuff. Again, we're not bushcrafting anything right now. We're taking dimensional lumber from a lumber store and using power tools and getting functional bows. So we're getting multiple things out of this. He's learning the build process, he's learning how to make a bow, and we end up shooting a bow and having a good time with it when we're done. So this is the first one he has finished. This was a mistake. This has got real skinny, and we were able to save it. It's a little light. He's working on another one right now, and just so I get caught up with him, I'm going to go ahead and make a pyramid style bow for myself. So this is my Osage longbow. So this is a self bow. There's no backing on it. This is a bow I made at an original wisdom longbow class. It was a great class, and this was my first exposure to a pyramid bow. So traits of this is a true longbow. This is like 72 inches. This is about 1 inch wide in the handle. After about a foot, it widens out to full width. I think this is like 2.5 inches. I'm gonna go as wide as the board I have lets me. And then instead of holding full limb width and then tapering down the last 6-8 inches like a more traditional longbow, the pyramid bow fades gradually. So I go from about 2.5 inches at its widest point down to about a 1/2 inch at the nock. So because of this, I've got a nice wide limb to carry the load, and I don't have a lot of dead weight, extra width on the limb that's not needed towards the tip. So this particular board, this is red oak. You can't just grab any piece of wood out of the lumber yard. You can't grab any piece of red oak out of the lumber yard. Elm, maple, hickory, whatever you're going to find, this is going to be in the premium section. Maple and red oak were the two types of boards I had to choose from. I did not find any maple boards. The red oak, I was able to find several. What you want to look for is straight grain. You want to see this nice straight grain going up and down the board the entire length. This is a pretty good board. If the grain runs off to the side, that's not going to work for you as well. That's going to be a weakness in the bow. If you see any circles where there's knots where a limb was growing, that's going to be another board that you're not going to want to make a bow from. So what you're going to need, this is a 3-inch by 1 inch, 6-foot long board. You're going to need 7 foot total. The 1 foot that you're going to laminate into your handle doesn't have to be a premium board like this. If you have a piece that the grain runs off the end, the last foot, you can take that foot, cut it off, and use it to laminate your handle. So another word about board bows before we get started in this is no matter what your interest, if you want to just go out in the woods and be able to make a survival bow, if your interest is in traditional self bows, osage or hickory, or you just want to get into archery and looking for a cheap way to do it, a board bow is the place to start. I made mistakes. I should have started with a board bow. I've tore up tons and tons of hickories that I have here around the house, learning how to tiller a bow. There is a lot of work involved with a self bow using an axe and a draw knife and traditional methods to get it down to the point where you're tillering it and can break it. So speed that process up and learn how to tiller and make a board bow first, and then you can transition over to a more premium Osage stave. So take a second and click subscribe. Go ahead and click like on the video and ring the bell to be notified of my latest videos. So I've got the center of the stave lengthwise and widthwise also. So I've got a little center mark here, and you're going to get a long shot of basically what I'm doing, and then I'll move the camera in. I want my bowstring to be right in the middle of the center of this handle, and I can move it in and out with these strings to compensate for any runoff of the board itself. There's our center mark, and you can see I'm going to move this over until I am right in the center. So I can do that on either side. So if I've got a bad spot, a knot or something I'm trying to avoid, I can move that in or out until I am directly in the center of the handle. So you could snap a line with this. I'm going to go ahead and make a mark right where the string's going to lay. I'm going to do that on both ends. There we go. So now when we take the string off, I've got my marks on both ends. And if I connect the dots, it's going to go dead center through the middle of the handle. So here is center of the bow. So one way to do this is if you want a 4-inch handle, to go ahead and just mark 2 and 2. 4 inches seems to be the standard handle. I'm going to be using my Osage bow as a guideline, and here's dead center, and I have a shelf in mine, and I've got a shelf at 1 inch. So I'm going to give myself a mark at 1 inch, and then I'm going to mark 3 inches. So this will give me a 4-inch handle, set up very similar to my Osage here. So now this is going to be the top limb. Set the width of the handle right now. So I'm going to make a mark at a 1/2 inch on either side of center. And I'm going to go ahead and do that to the top and bottom. And then just connect these two lines. So the next thing I'm going to draw out here is going to be the fades. So I am 1 inch wide right here, and I flare out over the span of a foot. So I'm going to go out 6 inches on either side of center. Mark this. Mark this side. So from the line of the handle to the full width of the limb, this is just going to be a gradual line. This isn't the case all the time, but on this particular bow, my distance from center line to end of the stave is the same on all 4 corners. If it wasn't, I would just make it so. So all I'm going to do now is connect the dots, draw my fades in. All right, so here we can see the handle and the profile of the pyramid bow. So this is basically the handle grip and the fades portion of the bow. All right, so now I'm going to take care of the nocks of the bow. This is the tip of the limb. I'm going to go over about 1/4 per side. All right, so right now I've got this all cut out, and it kind of looks like a pyramid bow stave. Issue is it's only 3/4 of an inch wide. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and laminate in an area for the handle. Here's the bow on its side here, and what we want to do is just give ourselves a decent radius to take this off. So you could literally use anything to get this radius. I use a 5-gallon bucket. I think it looks better when it's a little bit bigger. I'm going to go ahead and carry that center line over just so I see where I'm going to line this up. And I'm going to go ahead and hit this with a sander, and it's going to take me like a minute or two compared to using a chisel and trying to do it the hard way. So I went at that thing pretty aggressively, burned a wood, but whatever. I didn't feel like swapping belts. And then when I line this up, I got my center mark that's on my side. You can't see it yet. And it's going to look just like this. I'm going to go ahead and coat this thing up with Titebond 3. It's been 24 hours now and the glue's all dried up. So my next step is just to even this up. That's why I overhung this a little bit. So I'm just going to take the edges down. My next step, now that I've got the handle close, is these edges here. So I'm going to go the entire length of the limb all the way down and just make sure that's nice and smooth. I'm going to go with a block plane for this. Get it locked in on the bench here, and then go ahead and plane these down. That's why I left a little thick. I'm a little thick on the ends here. And it's going to give us a nice smooth finish from end to end. You can do this a lot of different ways. Since we're starting with dimensional lumber anyway, the block plane is going to be the easiest thing to use. So this board is 3/4 of an inch wide. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take 1/8 off of it before we even get started attempting to make this thing into a bow. So this end thickness is going to be 5/8 of an inch. And then the block plane was freaking pretty good for this. It gets it right down. Ethan's used the block plane before. He's used rasp. First time I'm going at this with the block plane. Clamped in like this works a lot better than any other method we've used in the past. Towards the end here, the end of the riser, I can't really get in there with the block plane that I have. Probably makes sense to get a smaller one if I do this more, but I can clean this up with a spoke shave. But for right now, just that rasp was able to take this all down. And I'm pretty much right on that line. And I jumped to 5/8 just from experience. It seems to floor tiller a little bit compared to the other side. I got no bend on the limb that I haven't touched yet. But this one is getting pretty bendy now, so I will go ahead, reverse the process, clamp this side down, and block plane it down so I have 5/8 on both limbs. So I've got this handle section dried and contoured, and I've got the limbs themselves planed down to about 5/8. Some of them are 9/16 in areas. Approach this a little more carefully, and I'm going to start using maybe a spoke shave and possibly a cabinet scraper instead of the block plane, just so I have a little bit more control. All right, so I've been continually going at these limbs thickness wise, and right now just by floor tillering, as I showed before, I'm getting a little more flex now than I was before. So at this point, I'm going ahead and cut my nocks in the end of the limbs, and we're going to go ahead and use the tillering tree that we made in another video. So cutting the nocks in is actually a pretty simple process. I'm going to come down a 1/2 inch and go ahead and mark both sides. So now that it came down a 1/2 inch, this is the back of the bow. So this is going to be the target side. Again, belly of the bow, shooter side. We're going to make a 45-degree angle from my mark that I put in back. So I'm going to come up to that 1/2 inch mark. This is easy to screw up. This is the target side. This is the back of the bow. This is the belly. So you want the 45-degree to be angled back towards the shooter. So right now I'm just fitting this bow up with a real loose tillering string. This is just number 72 bank line. And this is the golden rules of tillering. So number 1 is if you have a 30-inch draw and you want a 50-pound bow, you're never going to put more than 50 pounds of force on the bow. You're never going to draw the bow past your draw length. So at this point, we're just barely moving it all here. But we're just going to let these limbs exercise a little bit. So every time we make a adjustment on the wood, so each time we remove wood from the limb, we're going to go ahead and give it 20, 30 pulls, close to your target weight. We're not really bearing on this thing as hard as we can because it's a sure way to snap the bow. And we're just looking for areas of the limb that aren't bending. And initially we're just going to be removing bulk material like we have been doing the entire length of the limb. Eventually we're going to start seeing areas that are weaker and stronger, and we're only going to be taking wood from the unbending part of the limbs. So you're going to see one area that's a hinge point where that's a weakness. That's an area you're not going to touch, so you're going to have to weaken the other areas of the limb to get it to bend equal to the weakest part of the limb. So right now I see the limb on the right hand side looks a little stiffer to me, so I'm going to still take a couple passes off with probably the block plane still. I'm still taking quite a bit of meat off. I want to keep this process up until I get to brace height. So our brace height is going to be the distance from the grip of the bow to the string when the bow is strung. So key thing here is when I lock this in and place it in the tillering tree, I always have the same side. So I've got top limb on my right. That's just how I got it set up. And it's got a lot more flex now. Now I can take a straight edge and hold it along the limbs and look for a gap and see what area is bending and not bending. I'm seeing a lot of flex, fairly even. The tips are bending more right now. So from this point out, I'm not going to touch anymore. So I'm starting to get a lot closer, and here's a trick that you can use if you built a tillering tree similar to what I've got, is you can use a bathroom scale to gauge how much force and pull your bow has right now. So we're going to take it tillering tree, bow and all, set it on the scale, zero it out, and then as I pull down, I can see on the needle how many pounds of force it takes to get to a certain length of draw. It's a pretty good example of that one limb is quite a bit weaker than the other. So I've got pretty good arc through here right now. Probably a little thick right here. So I'm probably just going to work maybe 6 inches of this, but the bottom limb is significantly stronger right now. The last time I took 30 passes off the bottom, 20 off the top. Now I might do 30 and 10 to try to get these evened up. But this is the process. It's a slow process. Just don't overdraw it. Don't put too much weight on it, and watch for hinges. So the cabinet scraper is giving me super fine shavings as well as a nice finish that's really taken out all the tool marks from that rasp. So we're making progress on the tillering string here. This is about 4 inches. I want to get to fist and a thumb, so I want to get a couple more inches on this. At this point, you can start to see the symmetry on the limbs. And you can see right here, this limb's starting to bend a little bit more. All right, so I am at full brace height now. So this is a strung bow. At this point, you want to be careful with this thing. I'm going to flex it a couple times. Maybe give it 30 pulls with the new string on it, light pulls, maybe 3/4 pulls or something like that. And then I'll get it back in the tree. And at this point, I'm watching my poundage and I'm watching my draw. So before I shoot this, I really am going to go ahead and just finish the handle a little bit. You can see in the sun, this has still got rasp marks on it. The limbs are finished out pretty decent. But I'm gonna go ahead and cut an arrow shelf in, a real small arrow shelf, and then just work myself into a handle. So I have my shelf cut in, just the super small shelf, just to get it up off my hand a little bit. I hit it lightly with sandpaper on the limbs, and I'm gonna sand this handle out once I get it carved the rest of the way in and it fits my hand pretty well. And one thing to remember with this, you are removing wood with sandpaper, so if you want a 50-pound bow, you might end up with a 47-pound bow if you tillered it to 50 and then went ahead and got pretty aggressive with the sandpaper. So keep that in mind. So I got the tag cut off my tillering string here, and we're just going to shoot with it. This is 72 bank line. My brace height is about right where I want it. It's not going to perform as well with this string on it, but that's really no big deal. At this point, it's sanded, got my handle carved in. I'm going to go ahead and try to fire a few arrows. I'll probably do like a 3/4 draw the first few shots. So I'm almost back to full draw already. I'm going to go ahead and get a regular draw on this bow. So I'm going to call that a wrap. This thing shoots great. I am ecstatic with how it's shooting. This is just a piece of bank line. I've got no knock set. I'm just eyeballing center. And those arrows are for a different bow, so they're not tuned to this longbow. Super cheap, super basic process. When you have it on a flat, known material like this, you can draw everything out, use more modern tools, saw everything so it's going to look a little bit better. It's going to take a lot of the guesswork out. And as long as you use a scale like I did and never overdraw it, never draw over length or over weight, and you watch for any hinges, you're going to be able to turn a $10 board from Home Depot or Lowe's into a longbow. Till next time, this has been Jamie Boggs from Burning River Bushcraft. See you soon.